a great servant of our society. He has a truly outstanding record when it comes to provision of research and leadership, and has greatly served our society over a number of years. So I really look forward to this presidential address by Phil. He's someone who has a long experience, and really, I think along with Julian and Alston, has made major contributions and leadership in our society when it comes to the examination of particularly R&D issues, and has really a role in our society that few people have enjoyed, in that he has been able to take international research and bring that back to our society and enable many people in our society to enjoy international linkages. So, with further ado, I really look forward to this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ross. That's going to be a very hard introduction to live up to. I am pleased to be here and pleased to have a chance to talk on this topic. I probably bit off more than I could chew, in the sense that I probably bit off a little more than I could chew empirically, and so it's not quite as mature a presentation as I'd like, but for you anyway. I thought I'd tackle the topic of what do we know, and perhaps importantly what we don't know about global agricultural production and productivity stressing in the long run. And arguably the most obvious manifestation of a concern about trends in production and productivity get realised in folks worrying about global food security issues and their effects on commodity prices. And we're all well aware of the outpouring in the popular press in recent months of commentary about substantial increases, if not spikes, in commodity prices, which are an echo of exactly the same press that we saw 2 or 3 years ago, when the prices spiking in 2007. And if you look at the press, exactly the same media that we had in the 1960s, which was on the eve of the Green Revolution. So there were certainly repeated episodes of popular concern about food commodity prices. And there's also been long-standing professional concerns about this problem, dating back, as we all know, to Mr. Malthus. And it wasn't until I was preparing this speech I went back and actually read some of his words rather than taking them third hand, and they're quite nice words, if not sober. And his notion is that the power of population is so superior to the power in the earth to produce sustenance for man that premature death must, in some shape or other, visit the human race. Very powerful idea that was echoed by some of the good and the great, but as history turns out, not particularly prescient. Paul Ehrlich, in a very controversial book when I was an undergraduate, the population bomb, I think, was on the reading list of ag scientists, and he was right on the very cusp of the Green Revolution, put out this book that suggested at this late date nothing can prevent a substantial increase in the world death rate. The Paddocks had a similar view of the world, arguing that we should take a sort of triage approach to foreign aid, and that we should essentially write off India and the Philippines as being in the can't be saved group. And Garrett Hardin, who's famed by coining the tragedy of the commons, had a similar view, and he thought that India, countries like India, including India, had exceeded their carrying capacity. So what these folks had in mind was a strong focus, if you read their concerns, was focused very heavily on the demand side of the equation. And I went and dug up some long-run UN numbers, which I found sort of amusing. And when we invented agriculture, when we first figured out how to domesticate crops and livestock, That was done by just a very handful of folks. The estimates are between 1 and 10 million people, worldwide. By 1880, that's over 10,000 years later, we'd grown about 1.5 billion, which is just a smidgen more than today's population of China. In 1930, on the eve of the release of hybrid corn, which gave rise to massive increases in yield growth rates in the US and elsewhere in the world, we'd moved from 1.5 to 2.7 billion. On the eve of the Green Revolution, we bumped it up another billion to just over 3 billion. And in our lifetimes, we've seen this very rapid growth in population. So we're now sitting around 6.8 billion, where the estimates are that by 2050, we're going to be more or less around 9 billion, and depending on your assumptions about crude death rates and birth rates and life expectancy and things of that nature, the midline projections of the UN are that by 2150, we're going to be sitting at about 9.8 billion people. So we're certainly past, we're on the cusp of the inflection point in terms of the long-run population growth curve. But we get these repeated concerns, as I said, about episodic events in terms of food price spikes. And what we've got here is using US data, because that's where we could get some fairly clean data, going back to 1924, indexed at 100 in 1924, I've got nominal rice, wheat, maize and soybean prices plotted out from then to now. These are annual average prices through to December 2010. And we can see that the recent spikes aren't anything new in this series. We had a big run-up in commodity prices in the early 1970s. And on the lead edge of the Second World War, we also had a big run-up in commodity prices. So these are, within the space of a year or two, we had nominal prices increasing by 2, 3 or 4-fold in a very short period of time. If we run a deflator through those, we get a very different view of the world. This is sort of a view that we tend to know about these comparatively long-run declines in the real price of staple food commodities and feed commodities. But again, even when we run a deflator through this, we still get quite marked and dramatic price spikes again in the late 1930s, again in the 1970 period, and again in more recent years. My talk's not going to be about price spikes per se. I'm more interested in the trend notion and the long-run evolution of production and productivity, and therefore its consequences on food security and commodity prices. Just a sort of side point here, when you fit a trend line through these real prices in the inter-spike period, you get very different performances in terms of the rate of decline of these prices. So if between the first two spikes that I've got up here, you've actually got very substantial differential rates of decline in real commodity prices, and I guess Kim and others probably can speak to this better than I, that as we've opened up global trade in these commodities, and we've got market information improving and so forth, we've got much more of a harmonisation in movements of these commodity prices. So the inter-trend rates of decline, as you can see there on the far right, of wheat, soybean and maize are just lockstep and barrel between the 1970s and more recent period. The big question on the table is does this recent price spike represent just a continuation of the spikes of yesteryear, and then we're going to return to this long-run decline, or are they actually masking a structural shift in the trend rates of these commodity prices? I'll give you some views and evidence that I have to sort of form out views, but I think it's still early days to be very definitive, but there's certainly suggestions that maybe we're entering a different era than between the previous three spikes. As Ross mentioned, myself and Julian and others have spent a long time thinking about drivers of agricultural output, and clearly productivity growth is a big driver of agricultural output, and some recent work that we seem to spend forever doing. We've got a plot here from the post-war period. The top part of the graph indicates the change in the total value of production And the yellow part of the graph indicates the value of production that's attributable to inputs. And our estimates are that if you basically froze technologies at its 1949 level, about 39% of 2002 output could be attributable to the use of conventional inputs, and about 61% of that 2002 output would be attributable to the increase in productivity since 1949. So to the extent that we believe these sort of orders of magnitude, they're focusing on this thing we call productivity, which is merely just the difference between our measured levels and rates of change in output and our measured levels and rates of change of input, is something to pay attention to if we're worried about global production trends. I'm going to argue fairly strenuously that if we're worried about these production relativities and trends, we really have to take a very long-run perspective. A big driver of productivity growth is shown by our work and others to be related directly to own and other people's R&D. But our views in the profession have changed about what the nature of that relationship should be over time. So the very early work was done by Zvi Grilicus back in 1964, and he was the first that I know of to fit a production function with R&D as an explanatory variable, and he fitted it with a lag structure of 5 years between spending R&D and exacerbating the production or productivity consequences of that. His student and colleague Bob Emerson came along a few years later and doubled the lag length, more or less, up to about 12 or 14 years. I did some work a while back that reckoned the lag length to about at least 30 years. Bob and Wally Huffman have done some work around 30 to 34 years. And it's still a persistence in a lot of the literature. This meta-returns evaluation we did, a decade old now, says that a substantial number of the studies and the economic studies still think these lag lengths, still model these lag lengths, not sure what they think, but still model them as being comparatively short, less than a couple of decades. So if you actually go and look at real technology, so we spent some time sort of developing these technology timelines, not that I want you to read the fine print here, but essentially what we've done is mapped out all of the sort of points of discovery and development and so forth across three major technologies related to productivity gains in US agriculture. There's hybrid corn, BT corn and Roundup Ready soybean. And it turns out, from when you can track back to the initial discoveries that relate directly to the technology that was ultimately commercialised, to the point of commercialisation, the lags are of the order of magnitude that I've put up there. So for hybrid corn, it was 59 years. For the initial science that started to understand the nature of high pristicity in crops, it was 96 years in terms of a development lag for BT corn, and it was 26 years for Roundup Ready soybean. So this is just from, this is the whole sort of pre-commercialisation phase. A graduate student of mine is working on a really cool thesis, and I borrowed some of his work. And what we did was, on the left-hand side here, was took what may be familiar to many of you as the famous Grilicus hybrid corn adoption rate profile. So this is the share of the area in the US sown to hybrid corn technologies. But we tracked across the waves of subsequent technologies that have affected production and productivity in the US corn crop throughout the 20th century. So we had, was as late as the middle of that last century, that less than half the acreage in the US corn crop was exposed to urea or nitrogen fertiliser. A later uptake beginning in the 50s and the 60s in terms of the acres with herbicide and insecticide use, and a gradual increase in the acreage to sun irrigation. And then beginning in the mid-1990s, an uptake in GM maize. And if you look at the time period elapsed from initial commercialisation to 80% of the ceiling level of adoption, again you've got orders of magnitude of nearly 2 decades, 3 decades, a decade and a half and so forth, to achieve market penetration in a country like the US, where we presume everything works about as efficiently as it could with respect to technology penetration and diffusion.